Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Oh boy. How you doing, everybody? It's your pal, Tim Hanlon, that is. And it's a Good Seat Still Available, our curious little podcast, our little exploration each and every week into what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for coming by. We know the world is seemingly crumbling around you out there, and we offer you a brief but hopefully interesting respite as we continue to tackle all of our important issues around teams and leagues, defunctness, relocation, things otherwise forgotten in the realm of pro sports. We love doing it for you every week, and no time like the present then to take a pause from all the world's ills and kind of, rewind back to maybe more of a simpler and gentler and more intriguing time. And this week, we are ecstatic to go back into the Continental Basketball Association. Yeah, is it pro? Of course it was pro, but, arguably not as a top tier, certainly as the NBA or other, if you will, top tier pro leagues. But as we've talked about in some previous episodes, in particular, episode number, number 118, with our friend of the show, David Levine, when we talked about his book, Life on the Rim. And in particular, we talked about a team known as the Albany Patroons, and in particular, as well, narrowing it down even further, the 1988-89 season, arguably probably the Patroons' last sort of best season, under the tutelage of George Karl, Hall of Fame basketball coach extraordinaire he. And that was one great and interesting season, and that's a book well worth finding and reading. Life on the Rim by David Levine. If you want to buy a copy of that book, by all means, it's available through our link from our episode number 118 at goodseatsstillavailable.com. But I digress. The Albany Patroons, which is going to be the topic more generally this week, with our guest this week, Brendan Casey, and you'll understand why Brendan's interesting to do so, is that the Albany Patroons were arguably, and maybe not so arguably, one of the more successful and certainly long-lasting teams in CBA history. And as you know from our previous discussions, the CBA had a sort of a long and winding road of history, started dating back way to the 1940s when it was known as the Eastern Basketball League, and various iterations of its CBA-ness. But for a very interesting period of time, 1982 to 1992, the Albany Patroons were absolutely a phenomenon in the CBA and absolutely in the little town there, hardly a town, it's a sort of a nice-sized city, the capital city of New York State, Albany, New York. And we get into all those interesting times and championships, personalities, and we're talking about people like Phil Jackson, who arguably got not his start, but certainly the fuel of what became his rocket ship ride into the NBA, the Chicago Bulls, immediately thereafter, as a matter of fact. And there was also the coaching stylings of Bill Musselman, who came in after the Phil Jackson years and took the Patroons to a second CBA championship in a completely different style, much more fiery and competitive. Not that Phil Jackson was competitive in his own Zen-like way, but Musselman, a complete opposite in terms of intensity and willingness to win, if you will, at all costs. His son, Eric Musselman, many of you may know, of course, following in his dad's footsteps, arguably in a much more kinder and gentler fashion, but no less successful for sure. And also the years that followed that, too, leading up to the George Karl years, the tremendous record of the 1988-89 season that we talked about a little bit with David Levine in our previous episode. But, an interesting arc, this Patroons in their original incarnation in the CBA, a story of course, as we talked about earlier, players coming up and players going down, same with coaches, same with referees, same with administrators. But also it's a story of something we've talked about certainly in previous episodes, of a city, in this case, Albany, a mid-size city, the capital city, if you will, of New York State, that seeking its own sort of affirmation as a pro/major league type city. civic pride, all that stuff, arenas, infrastructure. That is absolutely part of the story of the Patroons, having been successful from the get-go with their cozy and very loud and cramped and old-style Washington Avenue Armory, which still around today and even houses the current version of the Patroons in minor league basketball. But, they getting success and helping basically fuel the building of what was then known as the Knickerbocker Arena, a 16,000 seat stadium that, was aiming to not only house the Patroons and their success, give them more room to breathe, but also maybe some Major League Hockey in the form of the NHL, et cetera. And those dreams can come and go. And we get into that part of the story, too. It's all fascinating, and it's all courtesy of our guest this week, Brendan Casey. Brendan runs an ad and promotion agency called The Upside Collective in Albany. And you'll get a sense of how the movie that he and his team put together called The Minor League Mecca. And that's really kind of what we're going to get into. It's a terrific documentary film. And we'll get into all the sort of promotional elements of when it's coming out and stuff. But if you go to the minorleaguemecca.com, you will learn all about it, as well as when it's going to be further released. And it's a tremendous excuse to get into the deeper and richer history of the 10-year original run of the Albany Patroons, of the long ago yet sadly missed Continental Basketball Association, the CBA, and we're going to get into more of that in just a moment's time with our pal Brendan Casey coming up. Before we get there, we want to say hello and welcome, of course, to one of our tremendous and longtime sponsors, and of course, that's oldschoolshirts.com in Cincinnati. P.F. Wilson, we bow humbly in your general direction. You and your fine cast of merry folks, always good to us, and will also, of course, be good to you, our beloved listeners. With a promo code, Good Seats, when you go to oldschoolshirts.com and use that promo code Good Seats and get and enjoy 10% off all of your purchases. It's, as you well know now, if you've been a longtime listener to the show, the place to get perhaps the greatest assemblage of pop culture T-shirts, not only in the realm of sports, but also various forms of pop culture, whether it's an old radio station, perhaps an arena of yore. Maybe there was not a team, of course, or a league, but maybe also a mall, perhaps a store or a bar, perhaps some other sort of facet of one's memories from growing up. Well, oldschoolshirts.com, you'll be shocked and amazed at all the great stuff that they have, including, and apropos of this show, the CBA Basketball League T-shirt. It's beautifully created. It's wonderfully designed, and it's got that great red, white, and blue CBA logo that most of you from the 70s, 80s, and 90s might remember. And what a tremendous way to celebrate this episode with our pal Brendan Casey, then to get yourself your very own Continental Basketball Association T-shirt with the official and original CBA logo. You can find that and many, many more items to choose from. All great stuff from oldschoolshirts.com. And again, please enjoy that promo code savings when you use that promo code that we like to give to you often, and that's Good Seats. Write it down, use it often, and we appreciate you doing so. P.F. Wilson and his team appreciate you checking them out as well. And again, our thanks mightily to oldschoolshirts.com for their continued sponsorship of this little show. And we look forward to now unveiling to you our great conversation with our new pal, Brendan Casey, as we get into more of the story of the Albany Patroons, the original version thereof, from the old CBA, and it's hoops time. Here we go. Please enjoy. Well, all right, before we get into the matter at hand, why don't you give a little bit of background about sort of, what your sort of professional life is, and maybe sort of the intersection of this Patroon story that excited you in the first place and convinced you that this is worth sort of making a documentary and then some about.
Yeah, so I grew up as a a sports fan. I played sports as a kid. My father was a big basketball fan. You know, he played in college, so I played as a kid. Recreationally, as I got older, just followed sports, basketball, baseball, football, and just something I loved. So just like so many kids, right? You know, it's a passion that you have, and grew up loving sports. Fast forward into my career, I had been working at an advertising agency and ended up acquiring the firm from the previous owners. And when we acquired the firm, we rebranded it to Upside Collective, and that's the current firm. And we also created a video production department and brought that in-house. And that was just to provide video services for our existing clients, nonprofits, small businesses, government entities, and just to supplement our other advertising pursuits that we were doing. So having that as something that we were doing as a company, we purchased more equipment, hired more folks, and I was always looking for things to do that were fun, but also helped us get better at our jobs. And I said, you know what? Being in Albany, New York, I knew the history of the Albany Patroons, the basketball team, and the Continental Basketball Association. I said, that'd be a cool project, and I didn't even know what that meant, but I figured I could get some interviews with some of the folks that were involved with the team. So the initial thought was, let's just do some interviews with some of these guys, and we'll at least have some short clips to release on social media through Upside Collective, and it'll garner some local interest in our firm, show people that we're doing video now, and there's a built-in audience of sports fans and former Albany Patroons fans. So that was the initial idea for how we kind of got this thing rolling.
Well, and this was about when, circa?
So this is probably I probably had the idea 7 years ago. We probably started it initially 5 years ago, probably did the first filming, the first session 4 years ago. So very slow, moving at a glacial pace because this is something we weren't getting paid for. It was a passion project, if you will. And we were fitting it in between paying jobs, doing the research on my end at nights, on the weekends. And I have 2 young kids. I had 2 toddlers at the time, busy guy. And so I just kind of fit it in where we could. And we would, get at work at this whenever we could work on it. So it wasn't like a major production where you scheduled 3 months and you just focused on that. We fit it in where we needed to.
So how give us a sense of the reaction to these things. How is it sort of being, I guess, sort of consumed and recognized? And then what was the tipping point that kind of said, maybe I have something more substantial here?
When I mentioned it to people that knew, if you were in Albany, in this market, it's a small market. We're close enough to New York. We're close enough to Boston where everybody wants to be. We want to be a major market, but we're never going to, right? It's a smaller market. It's just far enough away where you can still drive to see the Yankees or the Knicks or the Celtics. And, we're a small market. So here, as I would talk about it, people had fond memories of the Patroons, and they remembered going to those games because at that time it felt like this was something that the city had that was going to be as close as it was going to get to the major leagues. So when I mentioned that I was doing these interviews, everyone had a story to tell locally. Someone had a connection to the team, or they remember going to games or seeing Phil Jackson at a bar. So locally, as I mentioned it, people were very supportive of it, and they would inevitably have memorabilia, or they knew someone that I needed to talk to because their uncle knew this guy and he was at this game, and all these crazy stories. So it was very, very good response locally. So I said, I know there's a built-in audience of fans that would like this on the local level. And we started out by filming at the Washington Avenue Armory, which is a U.S. Army armory from the 1920s, I believe, and that's where the Patroons played. It's a great place to play basketball, to watch basketball. It has a history, very unique architecture, and we shot there and just captured the essence of this old gym and did some interviews with the team founder and president, the general manager, and one of the best players in team history. So we spent a day interviewing these guys, getting footage, and just talking about the team. And that was a great day, and it felt like everything went well and the stuff looked good. We have a great team of people that I work with here, and we brought on some other friends of ours to help us. So we used really high-end camera equipment, RED cameras. We brought in audio people. We said, if we're going to do this, even if it's going to be small, let's do it right. So we're proud of it. So at the end of the day, we looked at the footage, we watched some of the interviews, and it came out great. So we cut together some short clips and short stories that they told, and they were funny, they were poignant, dramatic, historic, and we said, this is great stuff. So at that point, I reached out to a writer for the New York Post named Mark Berman, as I knew that he had covered the Patroons when he was first a writer for the Albany Times-Union in the early 80s. Mark was interested in it because he covered the team and he had a history with them, and he put me in touch with Charlie Rosen. Charlie Rosen was Phil Jackson's assistant when Phil was here in Albany. And Charlie says, oh, yeah, come down. He lives near Woodstock, New York, in the Catskills. Come down, I'll talk to you. We go down, we meet Charlie, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, very intense. And when you meet him in person, much different than how he was as a coach. But we talk with him. It goes great. We do an interview with Charlie. He's just like a wealth of knowledge of all things basketball, specifically the Patroons, because he was there. And as we're packing up to leave his house after the interview, he says, would you want to talk to Phil? Meaning Phil Jackson. And I said, yeah, of course. But I'm trying to downplay it because I don't want Charlie to think that I'm using him to get to Phil, because we weren't. And I didn't think it would happen. He says, okay, well, I'll call him and I'll put a word in and, we'll see what happens. So we drive back to Albany, and I'm thinking, it's nice of Charlie to offer, but I don't really expect this to come to fruition. He's just saying that, or Phil won't want to be involved. The next morning, my phone rings. It's Charlie. He says, I talked to Phil. He wants to see you. I said, when? He says, Tuesday. And it's probably Thursday, right? So at this point, now I know, okay, this is going to probably go somewhere bigger than just a few social media videos, because I'm going to get to Phil Jackson, who at the time was the president of the Knicks, and he was working down in the city and in Westchester County in New York. So this is like a Thursday afternoon. I'm realizing now in like 4 or 5 days I have to go down and interview Phil Jackson. So I hurry and I go to the library and I rent all Phil's books, all that he's written about himself and books about him. So I spend 4 straight days reading to try to make my notes, and not only what was he doing in Albany, but his whole career, so I'm up to speed. We run down to Westchester County to the Knicks training facility, and we interview Phil. And it goes great. He gives us an hour and a half of his time. Couldn't have been nicer. Had great stories to tell. And at that point, that's when I knew, okay, it's going to get easier to interview people that we want to interview because we've already talked to Phil. And this is something that fans are going to get behind and going to want to watch.
So what is it? So it's probably a great sort of pivot, right? Because what is it about this that Phil said a ready yes to? Because it's obviously, as you get a sense by watching this, and it's fantastically filmed, by the way. It's really very well.
Oh, thank you.
You could tell the high quality and the interviews, but Phil in this I don't want to give anything away, but he's not only relaxed and nostalgic and pinpoint accuracy with the memories, but you could just see the sort of glint in his eye about sort of what he remembers about this arguably special time in his career.
Yeah, it's a couple. I think there's probably a couple points to answer that question. But when we went in there the first morning, we get down to the training facility, and the Knicks are notoriously, I guess, difficult with the media on some level, right? If you follow them in the New York Post,
I have no idea
what you're
talking about. No, of course.
So, and even today with the current owner, where things are. So we go down there, and they were great to me. They were very accommodating, and they were very helpful. But you get down there, and it's a very formal environment. And they say, well, he's in a meeting right now. He's going to come in. You can wait here. He might give you 15 minutes. He needs a special chair because of his hip surgery and his knees. And I wasn't nervous. And then I got nervous because these people are shuffling in and out. You feel as if you're, in the Oval Office, or you're, in Buckingham Palace, and you're waiting for someone to come in to meet them. And it's this very, high-pressure situation. So he comes in, and he's very serious and, doesn't seem to really be connecting with us and enjoying it. I'm like, oh, this is going to just be a dud, and we'll be here for 15 minutes. And we sit down, and as soon as the camera turns on, the lights come on, the first couple questions, he's kind of feeling his way out. But as he started talking about the specifics of the team and the players and the people, he kind of really just lit up and relaxed. And I think it's a couple of things. One, he's still very good friends with Charlie Rose, and these guys are now lifelong friends, and they've had each other's back and supported each other. So because Charlie asked as a favor to him, I think Phil was inclined to do it, and Charlie was also involved. He's in the doc. But two, once you're talking about it, I mean, right, this is, as anyone likes to reminisce or talk about, glory days, it's like the Bruce Springsteen song. I mean, you think about the days that have gone by and when you were coming up and you look back fondly. Now, certainly Phil didn't have the money, the fame, or any of those things, but I think he was a young man, his children were young, and you look back with really fond memories. So it's something that was a different topic of conversation, and I think he's probably been asked 50,000 questions about Michael Jordan, 50,000 questions about Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, but far fewer questions about what type of offense he was running in Albany or a playoff series against Toronto or Bill Musselman. So it's almost like you're connecting with someone on a level that only their friends or family would know about. And it was really interesting for him to share that. And, he got into there's some poignant answers and a couple of things we didn't even include in the doc about talking about driving up from Woodstock to the Albany Armory with his family, and it would be Sunday afternoon games. His kids would put the back seat down in the wagon, and they'd bring blankets and they'd sleep, and he would listen to Prairie Home Companion. And so you hear that, and you think he's just another guy. He's another dad with a family, raising his kids and doing these things. And he had those memories. That's when you really saw the smile come out, even more so than talking about players or defenses or how they won a championship here.
Well, but a hugely representative person in this story, right? Because it was, he was the coach the first year of this franchise, and what a year that was. I think it was special not only for him, I guess, just sort of as his career was kind of sort of getting a toehold, but
yep.
It also was sort of a magical / special time because it came to Albany, this team, his coaching, the team that he assembled, this sort of ragtag CBA, which we don't want to get into. It kind of was sort of a perfect storm of a start for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it really did. It really did raise the level of what this team was going to mean to Albany, what the league was going to be for the next 10 years as a feeder league to the NBA. It was transformative in his career, and you realize in the doc some of the decisions that were made, the phone calls that happened, and what would have happened for his career had he not signed on with Albany. Now, he might have been just as successful as a coach, but probably not. A lot of success is luck. A lot of it is hard work. A lot of it is just being in the right place at the right time, and I think he would probably admit that. Certainly would always be successful, but it became really the jumping off point for him, and then paved the way for the Patroons as an organization to have success on the court and at the box office here in Albany for nearly a decade. And, success followed that. So he was able to bring a championship here. The fans rallied around him. And, we're talking about a time, this is 1983, 84, 85, he was here through 86, 87. We're stuck in the digital age now, and we can't barely, recall what it was like before. There was 16 NBA games on at night, and you could watch any college game, and you can get the Big Ten network, you can get the ACC network, you can watch everything. Back then, especially in a market like Albany, you would have gotten the Knicks games, maybe the Nets games, and that was about it. And there would be a game of the week on NBC or CBS. So to have a team playing locally, it was the event. It was a place to be. It was a place to be seen. It was the place to go, and the fans rallied behind it because it was probably a much more social atmosphere. People wanted to go out. They sold a lot of beer at the games, and people would go out to dinner and have drinks. And now everyone has flat screens, and it's harder and harder to sell tickets, especially at the minor league level, right? So the pro teams still do well, but this was a different time. So everyone really got behind Phil, and it supported him. They liked him because he was an ex-Knick, but he wasn't Phil Jackson like we think about today. He was just kind of developing that.
Yeah, let's put Albany and the Capital Region sort of in context then, right? So obviously you're speaking to a media time that was quite different. Cable television was really kind of getting going, and this ESPN thing was kind of still in the proving out phase that sports could be a 24/7, 365 kind of endeavor, and ESPN obviously became very big part of the CBA in the latter part of the decade. But Albany, you've already sort of talked about sort of it's kind of a quintessential sort of mid-market kind of city in between lots of sort of bigger cities regionally nearby. But what about this CBA thing, a minor league, if you will, a feeder league to the NBA, its own sort of checkered history? It almost feels like it was that Albany and the CBA were kind of a convenient marriage, if you will, both looking for maybe different things out of the arrangement.
Yeah, I think so. The CBA was originally the Eastern League, and it was a league that was founded, I think, in 1945 or 46. It actually predated the NBA by a year. And it was a league that was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, areas like that in northeastern Pennsylvania. And it was really a weekend league where, guys would hold down jobs and they would play. And it was really good competition, ex-college players, some former NBA players. I think Paul Arizin, who played for the Philadelphia Warriors, played in the league. So it was a good league, but it was just a regional league. Like a local auto parts store might sponsor a team or a hotel, and they would play. But just on the weekends at night, not a huge thing. And in high school gyms, Jim Drucker, who became the commissioner during the 1980s of the CBA and had wild success there, and went on to run the Arena Football League and do a lot in sports media. He bought the league. He's the son of a former NBA referee, and he understood basketball, was close with David Stern, former commissioner of the NBA. And Jim Drucker, just a brilliant guy, a brilliant leader, and understanding how to build a business, and really wanted to grow this. So he took it from, a league of weekend players, former pros or former college players playing in front of high school audiences, to kind of build it out. Now, Albany was one of the first teams to break out of that mold of you're playing in a high school gym, to now they have, not a huge arena, but an arena that could fit 3,500, 4,000 if it's packed. And they're drawing fans, right? They're drawing thousands of fans to these games. So it gave him the taste that this could work, and now I can market this to other potential market owners. And that did occur. What Albany was looking for was something that they could develop the city around and develop support around, and also something that was going to be a rallying cry for economic development. Now, we get into this in the doc, and anyone that's not from the area won't be familiar, but a gentleman by the name of Jim Coyne was the Albany County executive at the time, and part of his leadership in government was to bring sports and entertainment to the people. He calls himself a populist in the film, and I think he truly was. But he wanted to bring things that were going to bring people downtown, keep people in Albany County for events, sports, concerts, and he wisely knew that, on some level people would go out and go have drinks, go have dinner, spend some money, and just create an atmosphere that people felt like there was things happening. So he wanted to bring Albany in and get a team kind of as a test to see how that would unfold, ultimately as a way to create a larger civic center in the city, which is still here to this day. So there was a reason for both to want each other, and it really worked out right away. And, the Patroons were here for a little over 10 years. If you think about minor league sports, I don't know the stats on this, but a 10-year run for a team in one city in a minor league, outfit is pretty good. That's probably beating the odds. Most of these teams are here for a year or 2 years. They move on to another market because somebody goes bankrupt or somebody's going to pay them better. But they were here for over 10 solid years and did well. Well,
no, I mean it's a huge testament, right? And I guess maybe almost sort of is emblematic. Well, I don't know if it's emblematic, but it certainly is. It certainly was a standout franchise and relationship, shall we say, between a league that was, continued to kind of trying to figure out what its reason for being was, as well as, frankly, a city and a region, like as we've talked about in many of these conversations we've had over the last couple of years, regardless of sport or era, who want to kind of not necessarily punch above their weight, but certainly get into that sort of that spotlight or the aura around the perception of a big league, major league team of some sort, some sport that essentially connotes with it, if you will, major league or top tier status.
Yeah. It's definitely, it is emblematic of what this whole story is about, right? I mean, and you can look at it across the board from, coaches that want to be coaches that have aspirations and goals and dreams, right? Players that have aspirations and goals and dreams. Even the referees, they wanted to get to the NBA. Now, what does the market collectively want? What does Albany want? What does the fan base want? They have the goal and dream of having a championship and supporting that and going to a game with a good crowd, and kids can have fun and adults can have fun and getting to know the players and feeling like there's some activity, especially in the Northeast. I mean, you're in Chicago in that area. You know what it's like in the winter. You got to have something to get you through, right? So this is an activity where people can get behind it. They really embrace it, and it's something to focus on in the colder, darker months. It's the same thing. I've seen Jim Boeheim talk about Syracuse basketball, and people say Syracuse has got the worst weather in the country, right? It snows, it's got lake effect snow, and it's just miserable. And he says, well, for 4 months, but that's when we play basketball, and the rest of the year we play golf. So kind of the same thing here. The fans wanted something more. They wanted to feel like they had something to hold on to, and Tim Layden, one of the writers from Sports Illustrated, he gets into that in the film, that really it was the market had been yearning for this for probably a decade. There were all these rumors of would an NHL team come or an IHL team come or an AHL or another minor league team, and finally it happened. And people did rally. They did rally behind it, and they got into it.
All right. So before we sort of get into some of the teams and the successes on the court and stuff, because there are quite some memories there for sure. I want to sort of circle on this sort of Jim Coyne scenario here, because I guess I want to juxtapose the intimacy, and maybe you can give our audience a bit of a sense of sort of what the environment was in the Armory. And then almost sort of becoming so much of a, if you will, success that it actually acted as fuel for the designs around creating an arena that in 1990 launched as the Knickerbocker that actually still exists today, but arguably it shows a bit of sort of maybe reaching a little too fast, a little too soon, or not being able to sort of achieve those, I guess, big city, big league dreams, perhaps. Yep,
and that's this is kind of it's one of those wrinkles to the story that as you unfold it, and it's very interesting, right? So, Jim's whole idea was to kind of bring in minor league sports, and the Patroons were really a pilot program to see if the area would support it, and if it did, it was going to be more proof for him to beat the drum to build a civic center in Albany County, and it ended up being in downtown Albany. But initially, they played at the Armory. Again, as I said, it was a U.S. Army armory where they stored armaments in the basement, and they did training, and then the New York National Guard operated out of there. They rented it to the Albany Patroons. So if you approach the Armory, it's a brick building. It's gorgeous architecture from the turn of the century, but you go inside and it's kind of echoey. There's a musty smell. The lighting's not the greatest. But if you put a few thousand fans in there, it's almost got a Hoosiers-esque vibe to it, an old Boston Garden vibe where the crowd is right on the court, and it feels bigger and it feels louder than it is. And like I said, the beer was flowing. It was a party. It was a big atmosphere. So it became not only a great home court advantage for the team, but a great place for fans to go and watch games. From kids to local businesses, everybody had tickets. It was the thing to do because at the time, the college teams in Albany, Siena, which is a D1 basketball team playing in the MAC in the Northeast against teams like Manhattan and Iona, they were still, I guess they probably had just gone D1. They were playing in the NEC, a very small conference, and they were playing on campus, and they weren't really drawing other than local and alumni. The University at Albany was D3, and nobody really went to their games. So there was really no basketball, there was no basketball team for people to get behind unless they were somehow connected to Siena. So it was really the only show in town. And, they got behind it, and the team played well. Now, if they came in and they continued to lose the first season and they didn't hire Phil, after they had kind of an iffy start, if they lost, I think that the fans would have lost interest and they would have probably just folded in a year or two. But because they won, as anything else, people got behind it. And it drew well. They did well. Every game wasn't a sellout, and I think it was hard for them to break even because it's minor league sports. It wasn't a profit-making entity, but the fans came and the team won, and that's what people really cared about.
It was also intimidating, though, right, for other teams coming in? I mean, there was sort of home field, home court advantage.
It was a place where I think opponents wanted to play, right? Guys at that level, these guys are pros. They want to win. And they get jacked up for a game when there's a large crowd there. But when it's the fourth quarter and that large crowd is on their feet on top of you, that's when mistakes can happen and people get frustrated. And some of these guys, they were playing in Sarasota, Florida, or Tampa Bay with the Thrillers. They're still playing in a high school gym. There might be a couple hundred people there, right? And it's some retirees that are down to Florida for the winter. It's not the environment that you have in the Armory. So this is more along the lines of what you would have seen at a college game, right, at that time. So they came in here, they got jacked up for it, but it got the Patroons, jacked, and that's why they always won at home, and they always had winning records because the fans came out to support it, and it was a great home court advantage. Yeah, and also they never turned the heat on, because if they turned the heat on too much, the roof would leak and the snow would melt and fall through on the court, and it would melt on the court. So it was freezing in there, and they had to share the restrooms with the public. So the players would go in to the showers after the game, and the fans the men would be using the urinal next to the players getting out of the shower. So if and same thing at halftime. So it was kind of this crazy environment. Tim Layden called it an anarchic environment, and he's just a tremendous writer. And really, you think about an anarchic environment for a basketball game, it's going to be a good home court advantage.
Well, indeed, and but you said when you sort of go through sort of the championship of the first season, right? And there's some, I think you've got a guy, a team photographer that you have in the film, and he shows a couple of shots. Yeah, a couple of shots there, and one of which is kind of just showing you, despite the fact that the crowd seems like it's so intimidating, you're on top of the court, and it seems like it's just one false move short of explosion, I guess. But the one thing about sort of the championship celebration there is it almost sort of seems symbiotic between the players and the coaches and the crowd. I mean, everybody, it was just one big celebration without sort of any fear or now maybe this is also a throwback to another time. Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of it. You're going back to a time when, some of the concerns we have now about security were not the same as they were then. But I think it was also that the fans had embraced these guys. This is the thing where they would go out for wings and beer with the players and with the coaches after the game, after every game, right? So they got to know them. Fans hosted players. They'd have them come over and do laundry at their house. Some of these players would live with fans, right? Because they'd be coming in and out on flights. They'd be here one day. They'd be going up to the NBA, or they'd be cut. So there became a community of boosters that got behind these guys. Fans would be in the locker room with the team. So there was really a deep connection and a bond that still exists to this day. I talked to some of these guys, this is now, 35, 40 years later, depending on when they played here. Someone like Scott Brooks, who came and played later in the 80s, he's still great friends with some of the folks from here in Albany and gets them tickets to see the Wizards play when they come into town, whether it's in Florida or at Madison Square Garden against the Knicks. So, they really bonded with the community. So when they won that first championship, of course everyone was going to be out on the court. Again, like that college celebration, when a college team upsets somebody at home, everyone's out, everyone's celebrating, and looks just totally relaxed and enjoying the moment. And then they're all in the locker room, and then they're all out for the parade and the rally downtown afterwards. So it really was a community team, and I think that's why the success kind of continued.
I love the fact how in this movie you kind of, and maybe it's almost conveniently sort of set up by the history of the team during this 10-year, 11-year period by itself. But obviously for all the stories around sort of the beginning, the inception of the team, the location of it, Phil Jackson and putting his early career imprint on this team, it's also similarly interesting how the segue goes from the coaching stylings, shall we say, of Phil Jackson to the seemingly diametrically different coaching stylings of Bill Musselman. Maybe a little bit of insight into that story, because Musselman not only put his firm literally, grip and imprint on this team when he came about, but he was also kind of a known entity prior, and not necessarily in the most positive light with Albany fans.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is interviewing Phil Jackson and getting him to be part of this documentary is one of the most important things. And unfortunately, Bill Musselman passed away, I think over a decade ago now, and wasn't available. We talked to his son, Eric, who's a tremendously successful coach. But the stories about Bill Musselman and the Bill Musselman sequence within the film, I think, personally is my favorite part of it, because you would think this guy is a character that was written by an author, and it's not. He's a real guy. So when Phil came in 82, 83, he finished the first season on a high note successfully. They won the title in his second year, 83, 84. After that, 84, 85, 85, 86, he couldn't beat Bill Musselman's teams, right? I think even 86, 87. So 3 years in a row, Phil was still here after winning a title. Great teams, always competed, always in the playoffs, but they couldn't get past Sarasota or the Tampa Bay Thrillers with Bill Musselman. So, Bill ended up winning 3 consecutive titles and not always beating Phil, but became that nemesis that Phil couldn't beat. So the Albany fans hated this guy, and that's what we get into in the doc. He's the perfect villain to hate, and they really just he became, the enemy number one, public enemy number one. It's interesting when Phil decides it's time to move on, he kind of steps back from Albany knowing that something else will come up for him, but he doesn't. It's not as if he got cherry picked and he was with the Bulls or he was going to stay with Albany. He stopped and he went down to the unemployment office, which I think is an interesting side note, because you can't imagine that guy going to the unemployment office at any point. But he gets picked up with the Bulls, and the Albany then turns to Bill Musselman, because Jim Coyne says, well, this guy's beating us every year. The best thing we should do is hire him. And Bill wanted to come to Albany because it was the top of the CBA. He loved the fans. He loved the energy. He loved the environment and the fact that it was a winning tradition. But you said, Bill's, his background and the intensity and being a known entity, not only within the CBA, you got to remember, he was coaching from a very young age in his early 20s, at the college level. At the high college level at the University of Minnesota, he coached Dave Winfield and some other really successful players at the University of Minnesota, but had some bumps and bruises along the way with how he handled himself and how he handled his team. So very controversial guy, but came in here and just kind of blew the doors off the league, wanted to go undefeated. I think they had 6 losses the whole season and was just this kind of drill sergeant, really militant guy. But, he had the players operating on a level that nobody had seen in the CBA. I mean, they were, you could call them a very bad NBA team, and that's probably what they would have been, but they were hands down above and beyond anybody what they had seen in the CBA. So, Phil being this very Zen, he wasn't Zen then, they didn't call him the Zen master, but he was developing that persona, very laid back, understanding how a team interacts on a personal level, how emotions play into it, how to get the best out of players and get them prepared to win, very kind of intellectual, I guess. And Bill is just like, we're going to blow your doors off. It's going to be intense. I'm going to bring in the best players, and we're just going to crush you, and wanting to compete so bad. They both wanted to compete, and I think they kind of loved competing against each other, because you couldn't have had 2 more different types of coaching styles just from even the way they looked, right? They looked so different. So when they brought Bill in and Phil was gone, the fans turned around 180 degrees and loved him, and they loved Musselman, and all of a sudden he was the guy in Albany. So, really another interesting turn in this story as that occurred, and both coaches won championships here. In the 1 year that Musselman was here, they won a title and had the best record in the CBA that had ever been played out to that time.
Well, also interesting personifications of, I would suggest, the league itself, right? Because and now I'm going to sort of project here, but you could make the argument that, coaches like Phil Jackson were more about, developing players for the inevitable call up, or, most of the players kind of wanted to kind of get to that next level at some point. And to your point, getting the best out of his team and his players and the interactions, and some of those are good habits and things to get down pat, so that the call up and hopefully a stick and some success at the, for that big cup of coffee at the NBA level would sort of come. Yet Musselman, right, kind of the inverse of that, right? Because he's arguably a former NBA coach with experience and some level of success. Maybe there's a consternation or a bit of a chip on his shoulder being back, if you will, down in the CBA, and having this, as you get in the documentary, this sort of prolific knowledge and pipeline into all the various player movements of the NBA. It almost seemed like he wanted to stock his CBA team with as many cast-offs of quality he could get from the NBA, right? Almost a completely different approach to winning games, these two.
It was exactly as you put it. They're diametrically opposed. His son, Eric, he recalled that, Bill said, having been with the Cavaliers, right? I said he had been with Minnesota as a young man and then had success there and bumped around and coached in the ABA, and then he was with the Cavaliers in the early 80s and felt like he got a raw deal and got fired. So his whole goal was to get back to the NBA, which is what a lot of these players want to do. And he told his son, said, I'm going to win so much that they can't ignore me. I'm going to win so big that they can't ignore me. And he did, right? So he ended up winning 4 straight titles in the CBA, but by a different approach than Phil would have taken. Phil would take the players that he got, teach them to play together, develop their skill sets, and win it that way. Because of Bill's connections globally in basketball, not only with the NBA, not only with college, but overseas, he was able to get the best players available always before anyone else could. And there's also whispers and stories that there was probably some money being paid that shouldn't have been to these guys that Bill was doing, and Phil may not have been. This is just what I've heard, right? There's no evidence of it, but, if there's smoke, there's probably fire. So he was doing whatever he needed to do to bring these players in and win. And I don't think it was the way that Phil was going to approach it. And I think it was hard for him to kind of overcome that. That's why, Musselman's team were beating Albany consistently, but you flip the script and the next year, again, Bill comes in and just brings in all these players. He brought, like, the epitome of this is him bringing in Michael Ray Richardson, who was facing a suspension from the NBA for cocaine use. He was a star player at Montana. He was drafted by the Knicks, played for the Knicks, and was, on par with all-stars. He was going to be the next Magic Johnson on that level. But his career was derailed by drugs, and, Musselman gobbled him up right away and brought him on the team. So that shows you what he was trying to do. Now, from a fan's perspective and the people in Albany, they didn't care. Everybody wanted that. You wanted bigger names. You wanted the better players. I mean, you wanted people playing that NBA quality ball, and they got it. So, you watch some of the footage of the 87-88 championship series where Musselman is coaching his team of, whether it's NBA cast-offs or guys that are going to the NBA next. There's probably 4,500 or 5,000 people in the Armory, and it's only rated for probably 3,000 or 3,500 by fire code because the fans got behind it so much because it was just a great team.
Yeah, there's a little part of in the documentary with Tony Campbell, who went on to play for the Lakers, and then obviously with the Timberwolves when Musselman wound up going there, which I thought spoke to me on a couple of different levels. Number one was sort of obviously the fact that as Musselman wound up, he was quite loyal, and his players seemed to be quite loyal to him, and he seemed to not forget some of the quality players that he had on his team in Albany when he got the call back up, if you will, to Minnesota, and a bunch of those players ultimately going to join him there at the pro level, at the NBA level. But also, I thought was really interesting, Campbell kind of said, after sort of getting used to the idea that he was in the CBA, which was a little bit of a tough adjustment, he also recognized that as he sort of went along, he was really enjoying his time. He enjoyed playing for Coach, and he almost kind of sort of didn't want to leave Albany in some respect, and kind of maybe took his time a little bit with some of the offers that he was that were being made to him to sort of go to the show, and kind of feeling that maybe that 10-day contract offer, which everybody would die for, is like maybe I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable about myself that I can kind of pick and choose. I mean, a little bit of it's a pretty big gamble, but it speaks to something that Musselman was bringing to the party at this point.
Yeah, I think what you identify is really the qualities in Musselman that got the players to respond to him. One, they trusted him, and he had been in the NBA, right? And we get into this again with George Karl in the next sequence of the film, but someone that had been to the top of the mountaintop, as these guys have said, and is going to help someone get there. So they saw in him an opportunity to succeed. But with Tony, who's arguably had the best career of anyone that played for the Patroons and maybe even the CBA, to go on, and star in the NBA, first as a role player for the Lakers, and to really blossom in a few years with the Timberwolves, where he was averaging double digits and in their, inception as a team. But, I think for him to say, I'm not going to take a 10-day contract, I want a year, and then to get 2 years from the Lakers, and he was willing to stay here and play with Albany the rest of the way, and not just cut and run, speaks volumes to what Musselman brought to the table from, a coaching perspective, but also just the environment in Albany, that the team was beloved and closely followed, and the games were well attended. And it also speaks to the competitive nature of these guys, where they want to win, right? They want to play games. They want their touches. They want their shots. They want to be involved. And, if they're not, they're going to look for some other place to go. But also the fact that he was learning how to be a pro from Bill and to come into his own. I mean, he was sent down for a reason, and then he made the right choice of, I'm going to listen to my coach and I'm going to do what he says and get back to where I need to. And a lot of stories come through in the doc, and some of it's in the final edit and some of these aren't. But a lot of these players, they don't know how to take rejection. They're the best player on their CYO team. They're the best player on their high school team. They're the best player on their college team. And then they can't stick in the NBA, and they're stuck in the CBA, and they have to be told they're not good enough. Now, Tony's an example, and a lot of these guys, of listening to Bill and doing what they're told and what's going to get you to the next level and having success. So buying into a team concept and kind of embracing it is kind of what he did. And again, that's why he has fond memories of Albany and lasting memories and connections with fans, and would do anything. If somebody wanted to talk about the Patroons, Tony's going to talk about it, despite having played with Magic and Kareem and on with the Timberwolves and Knicks and a number of other organizations.
Let's maybe get to the denouement here, because I'm amazed at the last, I guess, burst of championship success with the advent and the arrival of George Karl, right? Obviously, a big name and story in his own right.
Yeah.
But before we get to that for a second, though, explain to me how the Patroons did they get lucky with two great successive coaches and then a third with George Karl, or there's got to be something. What was it that was sort of drawing these coaches and then the success that came accordingly? Or was it cosmic, or was it sort of a grand design, or something in between?
It's probably something in between. I mean, I probably should give credit to Gary Holly, who was the team's general manager, for this whole run, their first run from 82 to 92. Gary was the GM. He's a guy that played college basketball. He had a cup of coffee in the majors, I believe, with the Texas Rangers. So had a background in sports. He wanted nothing to do with sports when he got out of baseball. He wanted to just get a job and not deal with it, and then goes on to run this team for 10 years. But he obviously knew what he was doing in terms of how to run the organization. And I think his recruitment of coaches, it obviously worked. And Jim Coyne they worked hand in hand together. They got the community behind him, and they were able to bring these coaches in. But Phil's success is what triggered it, right? So Phil had success. The fans came. They enjoyed it. And then when Bill was going to go to Albany, it continued. Having those two, having had those two coaches here, it made it much easier to get George Karl in, because if he wanted to get back to the NBA, right? And he looks and says, well, look, what happened to Phil Jackson? Well, now he's with the Bulls. What happened to Bill Musselman? Well, he's up with Minnesota now. So, not that you couldn't get to the NBA coaching other teams in the CBA, but Albany was a proven brand, and the community was going to support you. The fans were going to come to games, and I think they paid well. I got to be honest with you. They paid well. I think I heard a story that in one location in a different, maybe in Tampa, Rapid City, Bill Musselman was making $60,000. But I think Albany could only pay him $40,000 on the books, but he knew he was going to win and be supported, and he went for it. So, once it's a snowball effect, and I think, but that it started with Phil and it just continued. So, where George was, for him to come back, this was where it was going to be. But I don't think people really understand the quality of play in the CBA at that time, and I want to just touch on it quickly because today, you have the NBA, you have the G League, but probably the second best quality of play is the top leagues in Europe, in Spain, in France. Those are probably better than the G League, which is more developmental. In the early to mid '80s, the CBA was it. It was the NBA, then the CBA, and it was maybe on par with Europe, but the CBA was at least matching Europe. So you had the NBA, and then this was the next best talent. So these guys were athletic. They could shoot. They could play above the rim. They played defense. So, it was really a high quality of play, and that's part of the reason why fans supported it, because you went to these games. These were professionals, and they wanted to win, and, they were pit bulls. They were getting after it every night. There were no nights off. These guys were fighting hard because they wanted it. This is their livelihood, and if they don't make it, there's a book, I think, by David Levine. He calls it Life on the Rim, and he follows the team around for a year. And it is Life on the Rim. You're either going to sink the shot and go in, or you're going to roll off, and that's the end of your basketball career. So the quality of play was really something to be seen.
Yeah, and we encourage our listeners to, if they haven't listened to our episode 118 with David, you will enjoy that one as his recount of the season that Brendan speaks of. I'd say it's important to remember too that the NBA had less teams then too, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, the NBA was also, for folks who weren't around in the 70s, right? The NBA really kind of had its ups and downs in the 70s, and it was not nearly the juggernaut that it is today. So the quality of play, there's plenty of opportunities for great players. Obviously, the college basketball system, being a relatively strong pipeline of players and stuff, right? So this is, to your point, I mean, there's absolutely some superior talent, and probably evidenced by the fact that there was quite a bit of revolving doorness, both upstairs and downstairs, for CBA players and talent and stuff, and a lot of the smaller mid-markets thirsty for and ravenous for any taste of quote-unquote professional basketball, especially that being arguably the second, maybe, or third best league in the world.
Absolutely, and as they, their fans are, they want a taste of this high-quality basketball, and you talked about the CBA developing, and we mentioned Jim Drucker, the commissioner. He did a lot with entertainment, and you think about minor league sports today in 2020 and the successes that minor leagues have, especially you think about minor league baseball, those franchises that are successful, it's partly because of the on-field sports, but also the entertainment in between innings. What's good for families? What's going on? And Jim Drucker kind of understood this. So he made the CBA games, not necessarily a circus, but it had that atmosphere. There was always some sort of contest. There was something else going on at halftime. He made it an entertainment package, and he understood the importance of that. And then as ESPN was growing up, you go 86, 87, 88, or 87, 88, 89, they're covering these games. That just jacks up the attention and the eyeballs on the CBA too, because now these games are on TV, and that doesn't prevent people from going to the games. That means people want to go to the games. They want to see what this is about, to have a live broadcast, and they want to be on TV and be part of it. So the CBA really grew from, like we said, 76, 70 to 78. They're playing in high school gyms. They expand the league. By the late 80s, early 90s, they're playing in 10, 12, 14,000 seat arena. Some of them are drawing well, some aren't, but the franchise fees went up from, probably at the beginning $25,000 to a few $100,000, if not more, for each franchise. So it was moving in the right direction.
All right. Well, it was clearly moving in the right direction for the team, and obviously with Karl at the helm. The 90-91 season, a 50-6 regular season record, winning all 28 home games, and it was happy days are here again. Maybe a little bit of on that year, and maybe sort of the aftermath of that, because it wasn't there that long thereafter that the team not only did they fall in hard times, or was it kind of just they got sideways with
I think
all that?
What occurred, with George's run here, he came in 88-89 for his first season, and the team was still at the Armory, and they had a really good team. They got into the playoffs. They were successful. They didn't win it, but they had some good players that would develop. And then George left the next season to go coach in Spain. At the top tier league over there, I think with Barcelona. And then he comes back for 90-91. He's been successful 80-89 in Albany, 89-90 successful in Spain, comes back 90-91 and just loads this team up with just as much talent as Bill Musselman had done in 87-88. Mario Elie, Vincent Askew, Bernard King's brother was there. You have all these guys that were coming in, Terry Stotts. So he had this great team. They go 50-6, undefeated at home. And this year they're playing in the new arena downtown here in Albany. Now it's the Times Union Center. It was the Knickerbocker Arena at that time.
Which is what, like 17,000 seats or so?
It's probably it could probably fit 14 for basketball. Maybe for a concert they could do 17, but 14,000 for basketball. So it wasn't a fit for the Patroons. You draw 3,000 or 4,000 in the Armory. It's great. It's loud. It's hectic. It feels crazy. You put 3,000 or 4,000 seats in a 14,000 seat arena. It's crickets, right? So it lost that magic. It lost that grittiness. It lost that they had no home court advantage. But they won so much that it was okay that first season. And I think there was the new car smell of that arena was such an aphrodisiac for this town. They opened the arena with Frank Sinatra. I remember going to games there. Everything was new. We had never seen it. It was like, something that didn't belong in Albany. It was, an NBA quality, an NHL quality arena with luxury boxes and concessions and an atrium and, 2 tiers. But going 50-6 in a new building and having these great players now going up back to the NBA and George having success, it was really another feeling that, look, this team is great. Almost, no matter what they do, they're going to win. But after that season, George went on to coach in the NBA, and he had success. A lot of his players went up, Mario Elie, Vince Askew, and they had success. But after that, they stumbled. And I think being in the new building, the costs went up. The cost for all the teams in the CBA went up. So as the Patroons started to fade, the CBA started to experience problems. Jim Drucker was no longer involved, and he did a good job of holding costs in check for each team. You're only going to travel with 9 guys. Maybe we'll let you travel with 10, right? All of a sudden, teams are traveling with 12. And what was once a Northeast regional league is now all over the country. And so travel goes up. Everything gets more expensive. None of these teams can afford it. Albany has higher costs for a new facility. The gate is down because people aren't going because it's not as exciting. And it just they just stumbled. And at the same time, entertainment options changed and things just it was a different time. It was harder to make it work. So they stumbled until 92, 93. They changed their name to be the Pontiacs after a local car dealership. When that happened, I don't know what you would compare that to. Like when the Colts moved out of Baltimore in the middle of the night, like changing the name of a franchise from the Patroons, that's a beloved team name with a historic Dutch connection in the Hudson Valley, to a car for a car dealership.
Must have been a big
kind of crazy. Yeah, nobody supported them, and then they moved to Hartford, played in Hartford for a couple of years, and then they folded. So it was, an unceremonious end to a great franchise. But that's what you see a lot of times with minor league sports, right? I mean, you have teams here, they're here, they can have success, and they go away without that longevity that you see at the major league level.
I mean, there was a little bit of a hint of in the doc about sort of I don't call it the curse, but sort of the move from the Armory to the arena. I mean, that seems a little simplistic, but it seems like that. I don't know. You wonder. I guess everybody wonders, right? If they had stayed in the Armory and sort of, would it have made any difference? I guess. Do you think?
I think it would have probably helped keep costs down, and I think it would have made the in-game experience better for fans. It needed an upgrade because it was getting decrepit, and just it was a great atmosphere when the game was going on, but everything else around it was bad. And it's one of those things, the team existed on some level to help Jim Coyne create this arena, to create the Knickerbocker Arena, to have a 14,000-seat arena, not only for sports, but for concerts. They could bring in the biggest tours now, could play Albany, where before you would have had to go to New York or Boston or Montreal to see somebody. And now you could say right here in Albany, and Frank Sinatra, the Grateful Dead were here. Guns N' Roses, anybody who's anybody was and is playing here. So this team was created as a pilot program for him to bring people out, and it worked. And then it became a victim of its own success, so to speak. So if they had stayed at the Armory, it probably would have kept costs down. It would have kept the crowds more engaged. When you go to an event, any event, you want to feel part of something. You want to feel energy. And when you had 1,200 people in a 14,000-seat arena, it's just dead, and it's just sad, and it feels like for a team to be successful in the minor leagues, it needs to feel like it's a major league attraction, and that did the opposite. That made it feel like a very minor attraction. So when people would go to one game, they weren't going to go back. You can't give a minor league sports fan an excuse not to go back. You have to eliminate those excuses, and they clearly didn't do that.
All right. So to round the corner here, then, give me a sense then of, and this is fascinating, and we got to go another hour and a half on all this, but but we'll both have lives to get back to, I think.
Yeah.
Give me a sense of what you sort of got from this story. Obviously, you're in and around that area. It's obviously part of your life. You've sort of been in the region for some time, but what might the sort of non-capital region resident kind of get at all this? Because the one thing that I got among a bunch of others in seeing this is it almost feels, I mean, and it speaks to, frankly, the ability for you to find and get key people in all of this story. I mean, you people like Bob Lee and Phil Jackson, and I mean, you have like top Craig Kestishare on ESPN the radio. I mean, you've got all these great names of people who have gone on to or still in amazing walks of life and success, and yet they all seemingly to a person have sort of these very warm, fond memories. That doesn't feel manufactured to me. I got to think that's. I want to overuse the term, but there's a special sort of thing to this team and this time.
Yeah, there really is, and I think it's something that it can get overstated, but there's, for any minor league team that has seen people come through and go on to success, for any minor league market, for a market that has pushed someone up in entertainment and sports, there's something that people can take hold on. So somebody could be listening to this episode, on the West Coast, but and they may have no idea where Albany is. Most people if you're in New York City, they don't even know where we are. Even though we're the capital of the state, they think we're out near Buffalo, but they have no idea. So someone could be across the country listening to this, and the stories that they're going to kind of hold on to are the fact that these folks that went on to be wildly successful, and about the success, you're learning about the determination, the desire, and the ability to kind of just continue and work hard in somewhat difficult circumstances, in not necessarily the most ideal place, for something that they love to do, right? I mean, these players were coming from all over the world, literally, and ending up in Albany, New York, which no one knew where it was, in not ideal circumstances, playing in an odd arena for coaches that they didn't even know. The coaches are willing to ride in vans for 10, 15 hours driving with these players all over the country because they want a shot to succeed. So people can kind of connect to that storyline of, what goes on behind the scenes. You see the finished product when Phil is on the court holding up a championship trophy with Michael Jordan, right? You see that. You see even when Bill Musselman's back with the Timberwolves and they're winning in front of 35,000 people in the Metrodome. You see it with George Karl. He's coaching in the finals against Phil Jackson and the Bulls, right? So that's an interesting twist right there. But you don't see the hard work that goes on. You don't see these guys playing and training in a rundown old Armory, going out for wings and beer with fans, living and doing laundry at a fan's house.
Well, those van rides that you accurately depict.
Yeah. So I mean, they're riding in the van and all the crazy stories that go along with that. Because I think everybody, no matter what your career or what your path in life is, everybody has moments that they look back on fondly, and you realize that even some of these folks that have gone on to great success, they really are down-to-earth, normal folks. And maybe this is just luck that these folks that came through Albany were like that, but that's one of the things I was surprised at when I sat down, because, you interview people, and we interview folks for corporate work, nonprofits, and do a lot of things, just for our own business. And, you can get people that have an attitude on set, and even though no one knows who they are, right? They're giving you a difficult time. These guys, they don't need to be doing this, but they really enjoyed it, and they, just like we could talk for another 2 hours, they could have talked all day. And there were so many stories that we weren't even able to include because there was just so much, what are we going to cut, right? So, but this is a story that speaks to, determination, to success, to hard work. And there's so much intrigue in terms of the interplay between the people, politics involved with the building of the new arena, some of those things. So there's just a lot that goes into it, and it's educational. We've screened it in Albany. We've screened it at a couple of film festivals, and I've had folks come up, all different ages, some that know nothing about basketball, and they really loved the stories because they were genuine, right? They could tell that none of this was scripted. And I just would ask questions, let these guys go, and they would give the answers. And I was always amazed when some of their answers would match up, and everybody was kind of corroborating the other story. So I knew it was accurate, and they were telling it because they remembered it. So, and there was no pre-interview or anything set up like that. It was just kind of an honest story being told.
Well, I've had the luxury of being able to see the whole thing, and it's fantastic. So why not maybe you give the opportunity to promote? How are people going to be able to, outside of the occasional screening, which you've done already, how will people be able to access, stream, see, otherwise ingest this fantastic film?
No, thank you for that. So we just are finishing doing the final color grading on some of this. And like I said, because it was a project that we did not full-time, it's taken longer than we would have ideally wanted, but we wanted to do it justice. So we've just wrapped up kind of the final post-production. And if folks check out the minorleaguemecca.com, or they can even Google Patroons movie, you'll probably find it. Google Minor League Mecca, or go to the minorleaguemecca.com. Depending on when they go, they can either sign up to get information on the download and the stream that will be available soon, or by the time they go and check it out, we might even they can just click on it and they can download it or stream it. We might even put some DVDs up there for folks that want it as a memento or still have that that technology that they want to play. So they'll be able to go right online and find it and get it and share it. And I think, like I said, anybody that, if you love sports, if you love basketball, you'll certainly love this film. But if you love great storytelling and interesting people, even if you're not into basketball, you're going to like it. If you like to laugh, there's comedy in it. So we tried to give it something for everyone that people could get behind.
Yeah, and again, it's to documentary aficionados out there. It's the quality of the interviews, the settings. It's all top notch, and you've done a tremendous job. Having not been, if you will, a documentarian, I guess by trade,
sure.
I was just floored by the sheer high quality of it. I guess the only last question I would sort of ask is that I got to think that given your company's work with the Albany Empire of the now RIP Arena Football League.
Yeah,
I wonder if there's a story in there too, the history of that team as well as maybe the Arena League.
Look, I mean, this is they just won a title in the AFL, and there was the Albany Firebirds were here before that, and they folded, and it's like this is life in a minor league city, right? These teams come and go, and when I was a kid, I would watch the Albany Colony Yankees, and this was the Yankees farm team, and they had the core four: Derek Jeter, Posada, Rivera, those guys came through Albany, right, and they played here. And then that team moved away, and now there's a Houston Astros single-A short season team here. So, part of life in a market like this, as many of the listeners know, is these changes that occur. You don't have one entity for your entire sporting life to cheer for.
Well, look, there's a certain charm to, if you will, minor league sports. I think Albany will always be sort of a rich place for teams. And look, there seems to be no shortage of leagues and mid-size arenas and teams. And we're recording this during in the midst of some seriously turgid economic hiccups for right now.
Sure.
Probably overdue. And I've sort of made the case over many months that, we could be approaching peak sports. I mean, we're sort of at the end of maybe a 15-year or so cycle, just generally economically, that, has not forgotten about sports along the way. And there's a lot of, there's things like private equity and valuations and I don't know, there's 30 teams in Major League Soccer. I mean, there's lots of things that just seem, I don't want to say out of whack, but, some of these things are somewhat cyclical too. And you wonder if there are some future opportunities, I guess, for cities like Albany
I think that there are, and your point is well taken, because people that focus on Major League sports and the last, especially 20, 30 years, all people know is growth, right? Expansion, new teams, new markets, very little contraction. If a team is going to be contracted, they typically just move it to a market where it can be successful. So, you look at the long-term trends, there's never going to be continuous growth, and these things are interesting to look at. Interestingly enough, with the Patroons, one of the players from the team, Derek Rowland, who was a mainstay here during the 80s, is now coaching a reborn Patroons in Albany, and they're playing in a league that's been founded by David Magley, who also played for Phil here in Albany. So it's called the TBL, and they have teams. There's 12 teams sprinkled across the country playing in high school gyms, but they're back here in Albany now playing at the Armory. They had a couple of rough years where they didn't really have ownership, and they were doing it on a shoestring, and they got an owner this year, Dr. Tim Maggs, locally. They're drawing between 1,000 to 2,000 a game, and they're coming off. They won their league last year, and they're trying to rebuild it. They're trying to get this thing going again. So I'm fully supportive of it. They're having some success, and they're doing the legwork to do it. So there is, if it's done right and you can bring entertainment to people, they'll come out for it. But it requires a lot of hard work. There's a lot of hours that people probably aren't getting paid for, but they do it, again, because they love it. And that's a constant, right? You're always going to have minor leagues because there's people that want to succeed and they love the game, whether it's soccer, hockey, basketball, football. It's going to continue.
All right, our thanks to Brendan. Fascinating conversation. They tend to be here on this little show. And we love the film, and you will too. You want to find out more about it and when it's available, how it will be found, and you can access it. Go to theminorleaguemecca.com. That's theminorleaguemecca.com, all one word. You can also follow their doings about the movie on Twitter at Patroons Movie. That's Patroons movie, all one word. On Facebook and Instagram, you can follow them at the Minor League Mecca. And again, it's fantastic. It's so well done. And all the people involved that we've talked about and more. Phil Jackson and George Karl, Eric Musselman, the son of Bill, Bob Lee is, there's all kinds of great, Mark Kestisher is on the ESPN radio, and it's fantastic. It's all people who have just fond memories and wistful ones. It's fantastic. You'll absolutely love it. And we will, of course, let you know pointedly when any specific announcements or availabilities are out there. But make sure you follow them in the interim. And, of course, make sure you follow us on social media, too. That's also a good way to keep tabs on all the doings of our various guests and stories and reminiscences that they represent. You'll find us on Twitter, of course, at Good Seats Still. You'll find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. You'll find us on Facebook as well. Just search up Good Seats Still Available. You'll find a little page devoted to us there. Of course, you can go to our website. That's all things this show, including every single stinking episode we've ever done. You want to stream them or download them or share them with friends. Do whatever you want with them, within legal reason, of course. And that's at goodseatsstillavailable.com. That seems pretty obvious, right, by now? You want to send us some email? You can do that, too, of course. You have your own CBA memories. You got your own league or team that we haven't talked about yet or touched upon. We're always welcome to hearing your suggestions, your commentary. Please keep it clean and supportive if you can. But, if you got a criticism that's constructive and helpful, we'll certainly take that. We're big people here. And, of course, that's hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's our email address. We have a weekly email newsletter. You can sign up for that, too, on the website. And I think that's kind of it. We, of course, want to say thank you, of course, as always, to Jerry Payne Productions, for putting our pieces together. Always appreciated. And always appreciate you listening out there in wherever you're listening to and how you're listening to it. Hang in there, everybody. It's a tough world that we've entered into, but hopefully we've enlightened you and perhaps keeping you occupied otherwise to kind of keep your thoughts and your doings a little bit more positively focused for at least a little bit of time. And we hope we kept you entertained for just a little while the world crumbles around us. Until next week, we will persevere, and we hope you will too. Thank you so much for listening. And until then, take care, everybody. Ta-ta.